Money, never far from our thoughts. So why is it when someone talks about finances, we get heavy eyelids, fall asleep, and dream of what we'd do if we were rich? In this podcast series, Kent Tilley does his best to make us yawn with laughter as he delves into gut-busting topics like debt consolidation, asset management, taxation, and budgeting. Still awake? Good. No matter your income level, you will certainly learn something from this series. However, the focus is on underserved low and middle income Canadians who struggle with monthly cash flow and can't get quality advice because they can't afford to access it. In each episode, Kent interviews experts who specialize in helping people get back on their financial feet and get on track. He'll break it down step by step and demystify the process of taking control of your money. If Kent can figure it out, it can't be that hard. Trust me, I've seen him try and fold a fitted sheet.
Well, welcome everyone that's listening to episode 4 or 5 of the Kids in the Will podcast. I'm Kent Tilley. Today, we have a very special guest. I'm really excited to talk to him because of what his specialty is. His name's John Stapleton, and he works with sort of helping low-income seniors understand the benefits that are available to them in retirement. You can check out his website, openpolicyontario.com. Used to work in the government, developing government benefits until 2003, and went out on his own, as far as I know. So really excited to have you. Thanks for coming on, John.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I thought we would just get into it and let me know a little bit about your career and how it's led you down this path and what you're doing today.
Yeah, well, I spent almost 30 years in the Ontario government in, I guess, what people would think of as benefit design for social assistance policies. Social or income assistance is what we usually might refer to as welfare programs, and also worked on disability income programs. But in that time, I also worked closely with federal government and municipal governments in the design of various programs throughout our income security system, because welfare or income assistance programs usually there's an interface with every other federal program in some way, shape, or form, whether it's clawed back or exempted or partially offset. So you sort of have to know the whole suite of those programs. So when I left the Ontario government in 2003, I think it was about around 2010 or so, when I'm gonna age myself here, when I turned 60, I looked into early CPP for myself, thought about that. And then, of course, we got the big CPP changes in 2012, where you could keep working but collect CPP, which before that you really couldn't do in any easy sort of fashion. But at that time, I started looking at what the basically the literature, advice, pamphlets, what have you, broadcasts, etc., for low-income people. I found very few, and what I did find, I didn't like very much. I didn't think they did the job. I didn't think they were telling people what they really needed to know. So I reached out to various governments and organizations and agencies and nonprofits and said, this is something that you should undertake to do. And after about a year to 18 months, I realized nobody was going to do it. And I said, oh, well, sure. I guess it's going to be me. So in 2012, I developed something called Low Income Retirement, and which is a booklet that's on my website and a presentation. So for the last, 10 years now, I started in 2012. I've been in the libraries, church basements, you name it, up until the pandemic hit. Then I went online. Right. And I think at last count, I was somewhere up around 114 presentations, probably about 100 of those in person. And about the last 14 or 15 of them in online, where I actually discovered I get a much larger audience where,
Right.
I'd get lucky to get 100 people in a room for the main library in Toronto, but I was getting over 400 people online to take these, to go through this material. So I have a 2-hour version of it. And then I've recently branched out and do 4 different episodes of it over a longer time period. So I've done that during April, and I'll probably get, don't do much in the summer, but then in the fall, we'll get back into it, especially now that old age security for people who are 75 and up, there's going to be an extra $70 or so starting in July per month. Well, $65, I guess, so for the 75 plus. So seniors' income is changing. It's changing all the time. And the different forms of income. So I try to keep up with that and try to keep it in the what I have in my website up to date, and continue to learn as I get people's complicated situations and talk them through it. So that's basically me.
Nice. Well, good for you. I mean, that's great work, and I know you spoke about this a little bit earlier, how in some form or another, 31% of seniors in Canada right now are collecting at least some GIS.
Right.
Which is, well, I remember the first time I learned about GIS and that it was about 3 million Canadians at the time that were collecting it. And I was like, oh, we've done a terrible job of helping people understand how to deal with money if that many people have to be collecting GIS. And then you brought up another great point, which was nobody was going to do this, so you had to go out and do it on your own. So nobody in the government, and it's just that the information isn't there from that side. So it's up to people like you and me and others, I guess, to try and inform people and keep up with the changing structure every single day, right? Which becomes pretty difficult when we're trying to keep up with the government changing things every single day. So I guess, well, can you give anybody listening just sort of a high-level explanation of all of the benefits and how they tie together?
Yeah, I guess the best way to do that is to say there's various different forms of income that seniors get in Canada. But the first is the taxable old age security, which is about $650 a month at its maximum. And most Canadians are going to collect CPP retirement income because they'll have worked. Most Canadians have worked some point in their lives, and they'll get CPP. For those 31% of Canadian seniors whose income is, generally speaking, let's say it's at or about the poverty level. The federal government now has a new official poverty standard called the market basket measure, and seniors, the poorest seniors tend to be in what we call shallow poverty rather than deep poverty because they get these benefits. So the most important benefit for a low-income senior is this guaranteed income supplement. Some people just call it the supplement. Some people call it GIS, but it's a non-taxable benefit. You record it on your income tax, but you back it out at the end of your income tax form. And so it's not taxed. And it's the largest single element for most low-income seniors in their income, because the GIS is now up to about $975 a month if you have no other income. Seniors also might get income from working. A lot more seniors are working now. They might get income from a pension. from an outside pension, and seniors might get income through refundable credits, like the GST credits or the carbon credits, that sort of thing. So those are the things, those are the various sources of income. But the changes that we've seen over the last decades, where fewer and fewer people have what we call a defined benefit pension plan, we see fewer and fewer seniors, especially those working in the types of work where they don't get a pension, and you see a lot of them getting the guaranteed income supplement. The main issue with the guaranteed income supplement is that it has a nominal, I'll say a beginning tax-back rate, clawback rate of 50% on any other outside income. So for example, if anybody getting CPP, their GIS is going to go down, it's going to be clawed back. And if they have pension income, the GIS is going to be clawed back. If they have pension income, if they have interest income, however small, or dividend income, that's going to also figure into the GIS clawback, although the old age security itself doesn't figure into it. So what I try to do is advise them to be in forms of income that are going to be friendly as it relates to the GIS clawback, as opposed to those that are going to suffer the GIS clawback. And so I spend a lot of time with people saying the types of savings and the instruments. In fact, you can do this planning even if you don't have any money. There's all sorts of planning that you can do to make sure that you're in the types of savings vehicles that are going to keep you away from either the GIS clawback or be detrimental. And so that's largely what my seminars are about. And I'll just say that for those seniors that do receive the GIS, they're kind of like in a alternate or parallel universe where everything is upside down and backwards, because the mainstream advice that they're going to get from the banks on TV, radio, newspapers, and that sort of thing is going to tell them to do certain things. And I basically tell them, if you did exactly the opposite, you're going to be better off.
Right. So a couple of questions. One, with the credits like the GST and carbon credits, those don't affect GIS, do they? Or
no, any form of refundable credits, which are like, I always try to make a distinction between non-refundable and refundable credits. And non-refundable credits are like government coupons, and the refundable credits are like government gift cards. But those gift cards that we get that don't depend on whether you pay tax or not, but are just benefits that the government gives through the tax system, do not affect your guaranteed income supplement amounts. They're exempted.
Okay, perfect. And yeah, so one of the things that, just leading into it and the implementation of the tax-free savings account for anybody that has sort of any money outside of a pension or, within their RSP or whatever, to find a way to get that money into a TFSA so that any income coming out, any income generated within it is tax-free, will not affect your GIS whatsoever. So, that would be a big part of the planning that I would talk about. Now I'm uncertain as to whether or not you and I are on the same page as far as the timing of things. So I'm curious if you could run me through potentially an example of how you think it's backwards. I want to know if I'm wrong.
Okay. Generally speaking, and perhaps this is getting a bit into previous advice that financial advisors would give, but generally speaking, the idea is you would register for an RSP in your younger working years on the idea that when you retired and had a lower income, that's when you would take it out and pay less tax because you got a deduction up front But now in retirement, you're taking the money out and you would pay less tax on it. That's the whole idea behind an RRSP. But for low income people, if they take money out of their RRSP, they not only potentially pay tax on it, but they also suffer the GIS clawback, which for a single person is nominally 50%, but it's the real clawback is 59% because of the way GIS is structured. So they're not only looking at whatever taxes they're going to have to pay, they're going to suffer a 59% reduction. And that's higher than any tax rate that we have in the income tax system. If they have a tax-free savings account going into retirement, and that's where their money is, and they take it out, then of course they don't pay it. The money is completely not taxed, first of all, but it also does not affect the guaranteed income supplement. So seniors who are receiving GIS, that 31% of Canadian seniors are much better off being in a tax-free savings account because they would avoid the GIS clawback. But secondarily, TFSAs don't change when you turn 71. But when you turn 71, and as I did this past year, you turn 71.
You really aged yourself now.
I know. But the TFSA stays a TFSA. But RRSPs have this funny habit of turning into a registered retirement income fund at 71, and all of a sudden you're obligated by the government to take money out of the RRIF. You can't, at an ever increasing percentage rate that generally goes from 5% when you're 71 to 20% when you're 95, if you live that long.
Right.
So every dollar that you take out, not only is it subject to tax, but it's going to be subject to the GIS clawback. So I tell people to get into TFSAs first and keep the TFSA. But I also tell them if they have RRSPs, if I'm lucky enough to advise a 55-year-old who's got their financial arteries clogged with RRSPs and they are GIS bound, in other words, they have no pension and they have no prospects, at that age, they're going to pretty well know what their income's going to be unless they win the lottery. So I had generally advised them to get out of their RRSPs, take the tax pain, because the pain that financial pain you'll suffer at age 65 will be even worse. The other point is that once again, if you once you turn 71 and you start having all your RRSPs turn into RIFs, if you have any sort of financial crisis of any sort, which could be anything from a refrigerator or a car through to adult children that you need to help out, and you take money out of a RIF. When you're having your worst financial day of the year, the government's having its best windfall
from you, right? Exactly.
From you. Yeah. So if you're in a TFSA and you have a financial crisis, what do? You just simply take the money out and you pay out anything that you need. So again, that's TFSA first, RRSP second. Cash out your RRSPs before age 65, and then the second piece of advice I give is if you have any RRSP room once you turn 65, that's the first time you ought to be taking out an RRSP, because an RRSP gets a deduction which lowers your income, which means all of a sudden you're going to get more GIS. The GIS tap is turned on at that point. So that's why it's a parallel universe. It's totally, in other words, everything that you would be advised to do if you're in the 68% of Canadians, where the good financial advice that we get through newspaper, radio, TV, experts, et cetera, is correct. It's exactly wrong for people who are going to be on the GIS.
Right. But do we get the right information for those 68% of people?
Generally speaking, no. There's no money in advising, or very little money in advising low-income people We now, at least through Jason Watt and his people, Alexander McQueen, who used to write for the Globe and Mail and is now with Money Sense, I believe, they have a course now that financial advisors can take, and on exactly what I'm talking about right now. And I think in some part they modeled the course for financial advisors on this. On this advice, financial advisors who do take the course and who are interested in this advice are usually people. I've noticed them many times at my seminars. I see somebody come in with a $2,000 suit, and I say, "Well, this is not. This is not. They're not here for themselves." And almost in every case, they'll say, "I got a nephew. I got a niece, somebody's not going to be able to work that much. They got a disability, whatever, and they're going to turn 65." And I've been and they get an inkling, they start to read what the mainstream advice is, and they say, "Hey, this doesn't work for them."
Right.
They go to their financial advisor who doesn't give them the right advice, and then they get unhappy with that. So I get phone calls from panicking financial advisors who say,
Right.
"Look, I gotta learn this stuff fast."
Well, yeah. So just for me, I mean, I worked in the industry for 6 years before I went on my own. I didn't know anything about GIS other than the little bit I learned in class. We never talked about it as a planning structure because there's no sales in it. So it wasn't until I really did some videos and learning on it on my own that I was like, oh, this is how I would start to plan around it if I came across that scenario. Always goes to the TFSA.
Yes.
Unfortunately, if you are in that situation, you need to get in like pre-prepared. And that's the hard part, is like people maybe not thinking about it at 55, but if you are, then you can sort of pre-plan for how to structure GIS correctly.
Yes.
And you're right. I mean, it's unfortunate because there isn't any money in it, so it's hard to do anything about it because you're like, well, we all have to feed ourselves and pay the bills as well. So it's sort of this catch-22 of hell, sort of. But I was wondering also about your CPP timing. So this is where I think we might be on a different page. I think you mentioned to me earlier that you would suggest taking CPP as early as possible because of the clawback. But when I was thinking about it, it was like, well, okay, if you can find a way to make things work with the TFSA and your savings and OAS, then you could get GIS from 65 to 70, for example, and then have enhanced CPP for the remainder of your life. Does that math not sort of even out, or am I mistaken there?
I think generally it could even out, but for most people it won't. And here's the reason. I advise people who are low income and know they're going to be receiving the GIS, they're GIS bound, so to speak, but they haven't yet turned 60. I advise them to take their CPP at 60, as long as they're not receiving income assistance, like any sort of welfare program or any sort of disability program that's going to claw it back. There's no sense taking it if they're going to claw it back at 100%. So for those people who are low income but are not getting an income or social assistance program, I say take the CPP early, because it'll be approximately 36% less. You probably need the money if you're low income.
Right.
So you go to 65, and then the GIS clawback will be on a lower amount of
the CPP.
So that means that if that clawback for a single person is effectively 59% on that CPP, you're going to have to live till you're about 110 in order to get the benefit that you would otherwise get if you start, if you didn't start your CPP until age 70. Most of the people that I talk to really need that money earlier, and it's just one of the facts of life that lower income people don't live as long, and there's going to be very few that would break even on the deal. I think right now the break even point for CPP comes, somewhere between age 78 and 82. In other words, you'd be better off waiting and taking it later at 70. But for a lower income person, the chances of anybody breaking even on the deal is going to be very, very low. So they're much better off taking it at 60, and then of course they'll suffer a higher clawback starting at 70. But the amount of money that they will have gotten in the meantime from CPP will be more than they'll be able to effectively get later on.
Right. Well, that makes perfect sense for sure. Because I guess I was just sort of thinking about somebody that's still working from that 60 to 65 range. And in that case, would that stay the same? Would you take it and then use the CPP post-retirement benefit on top of it, or?
Well, of course, at age 65, you can apply to your employer not to have your CPP deducted. So it'll be up to you what you think of the investment value of the PRB, the post-retirement benefit, or you could just leave it, tell your employer not to collect it after 65. But generally speaking, if somebody says to me, look, I intend to keep working after 65, and I say, how much money are you going to make? And they say, well, maybe, I don't know, I just get minimum wage and I work at a hardware store, or I'm working at some sort of service, or I've run into Walmart greeters and commissionaires and people like that. Well, they're generally speaking going to make more than $20,000, so they're not going to get GIS. So,
right.
So it's only the people that for sure are going to hit 65, apply for their OAS and get their GIS there, that I tell. Those are the people, take your CPP early, because you're gonna eventually you're gonna make on the deal overall. The big uncertainty, of course, none of us know the day that we're going to leave the planet, and none of us want to know the date.
Right.
So, I could get somebody who's really a whole lot better off and tell them to wait till they're 70. And of course, if they die on their 70th birthday, it was wrong advice.
Totally.
So
I know. Yeah. It's well, that's the one thing for sure. It's very hard when that's the biggest variable to all of it is longevity. And you're like, well, I have no idea. So here's the situation. And, maybe this is going to work way better until 70, but if you live until 90, then that could really backfire, right? So it's sort of finding the balance that fits for each person, and each person is so much different almost. Even in the low income, I would think you see a whole variety of things. And that's where my next most complicated topic comes in.
Sure.
What about newer Canadians that haven't lived in Canada for 40 years that are not going to receive full OAS? It's very hard to find information on what GIS they're eligible for, because it's supposed to be based on the percentage of OAS you receive, as far as I know. What's going on there?
Well, I guess this is one of the areas that I looked into, and that you'll find it in my booklet that's called Low Income Retirement Planning on my website, which is openpolicyoontario.com, and the retirement tab. That booklet devotes about 1/3, it's in the back, on people who come to Canada as adults.
Right.
And the reason I call it coming to Canada as an adult rather than immigrants and refugees is because the same rules affect returning Canadians. And so it has nothing to do with citizenship. It has to do with how many years you've been breathing Canadian air legally and you're not a visitor.
Right.
And so if you're coming from another country as an immigrant or refugee, of course, you're going to get your permanent residency. And on that date, that's when you start counting your eligibility for GIS on old age security. And the way it works is like this. It's the 40 years, you need 40 years within the from your 18th birthday to your 65th birthday. So there's 47 years there between 18 and 65. And if you have 40 years of residency in Canada, breathing Canadian air legally, and you turn 65, you'll get full OAS. But of course, let's say you came here when you were 45, you're going to turn 65. They're only going to give you half your old age security, because it's based on a denominator of 40. And so if you've been here 20 years, then that's 20 40ths. They're going to give you half your old age security. Now, if you're a sponsored immigrant and the sponsorship's still in force, they're not going to give you any GIS. But if your sponsorship, if you are a sponsored immigrant as opposed to an independent immigrant or an economic immigrant, then if you end up being low income, you'll not only get the guaranteed income supplement, but you'll get a super GIS that will largely, but not completely, make up the additional amount of OAS that you're not getting, that you're losing out on. I wouldn't even dare to set out the formula that the federal government has put in place for that. The math is very, very daunting. But let's just say it makes up a lot of the old age security that you otherwise would lose. It's important to note that it's also returning Canadians, as people who go abroad to work, and let's say they left when they're 25 and they worked overseas for many, many years, and then they come back to Canada, usually for two reasons I've discovered in my work. One is because of the healthcare system in Canada. It may not be a better health system, but it's certainly a good health system, but it's also premium free. And where they are in other countries, they're often going to have to pay for it once they stop working. The second big reason that people return is mandatory retirement in other countries. There's mandatory retirement rules in all sorts of countries in Asia, Europe, South America, et cetera, that retire you at 62, 63, 64. So it's often below 65. So those people come back to Canada for healthcare and to continue working because because we have abolished mandatory retirement in Canada. So, but they're affected by those same rules.
Right.
And there's another complication that you should know about, and that is there's about 200 countries in the world. That's a good question that a kid will ask a parent.
Right.
How many countries are there in the world? There's about 200, but 59 of those countries have signed social security agreements with Canada that are reciprocal agreements. And the usual waiting period for old age security is 10 years before, say, you can't get it till you turn 65. But the normal waiting period is that you have to have at least 10 years residency in Canada before you can get old age security. And that's certainly true of 140 countries, but for those 59 countries that have signed agreements, you can get your old age security after 1 year. Of course, the problem is you only get 1/40th if you moved to Canada at age 64, then you turn 65, you got a year here of permanent residency, they'll give you 1/40th of the OAS, but you do qualify for that, for not only the GIS, but the super GIS, as long as you're not a sponsored immigrant. If you're sponsored, you don't get any GIS.
Okay. And so what does the sponsored immigrant mean? Somebody brings you over and they're financially responsible for you in a way, or is that?
Yeah, exactly. This is somebody's trying to bring over a parent or an uncle or an aunt, and they're often the person that came here on a student visa or a work visa. There'll be some sort of informal deal that they're again going to try to sponsor the parent, the uncle, the aunt, the brother, the sister, that sort of thing to Canada. And sponsorships are now 20 years in duration. And GIS, you can't get GIS until the sponsorship period has lapsed. Most of our sponsorships that we have right now in place are 10-year sponsorships, but as of 2014, then Prime Minister Harper, along with Jason Kenney, who was his immigration minister, and Chris Alexander, who was the minister responsible for the GIS, they put in rules that said as long as you're a sponsored immigrant, you can't collect GIS until the sponsorship period is over, and that could be a period up to 20 years.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, but the sponsor, of course, said in the first place that they are going to make sure that the person's economic survival and well-being is something that they would take care of, and they had to prove in the first instance that they had the money to do that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that one kind of makes some sense to me.
Yeah.
For sure. So what? I mean, I could ask you questions about this all day. I'm sure there are a lot of people that would love to know more. I don't know how. We don't have a ton of time left, so I'll ask you a couple more questions because I think it's interesting. You were a benefit designer in your past career. So if I were to ask you, how could we change this to make this better? Do you have a simple answer?
I guess the simple answer for me is when I was looking at Chrystia Freeland's budget and how much money that she is going to spend on old age security between now and 2027, I just found to be unbelievable, tens of billions of dollars. And it seems to me it'll probably be politically unpopular, but I'm not a politician, so I'll give you the idea anyways, that maybe that we would put a bit more money into the guaranteed income supplement than we are putting into the old age security part of it, because then that would, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure fiscally on the old age security program. We've kept our age at 65, as you know. A lot of other countries, if you were living in Denmark right now, you'd talk to 5 different people and they'd have 5 different dates for when they were going to start receiving their Denmark's version of old age security. And so a lot of countries have moved away from the 65 date. And it's, because it's a fairly expensive program because of the number of years that we live. So if I'm thinking just inside the old age security box, I might want to put a little bit more money into the supplement to keep those seniors who are in shallow poverty, to keep them out of poverty. It's better for them. It's less. If you're talking about money, it's less taxing on our healthcare system. If people got enough money to eat a proper diet and pay the rent or the mortgage, and so that's probably where I've put my first attention and in those programs. But I'd also expand the TFSA perhaps a little bit faster so that people could put money into a tax-free savings account. And I guess probably controversial, and another reason I won't run for political office is I'd also put a bit of a match to the TFSA for lower income people to encourage them to put the money in. Because of course, with an RRSP, you not only get the benefit of the money being inside, but you also get the value of the deduction. So why don't we equalize it for the TFSA a bit, and not to make it deductible, but at least to give some sort of boost that the government might put in, like 5 or 10%. If you put in this amount and $6,000 into savings, maybe we'll add another 600 to it to encourage you to put money into a tax-free savings account. That would do two things. It would help people save for the retirement tax-free, but at the same time, it would encourage low-income people to take on the TFSA when sometimes they inappropriately put money into an RSP. So those are three ideas, anyways.
I mean, I have ideas up a whole bunch of ideas that, yes, exactly why I wouldn't be running for office is because it wouldn't be popular with a lot of people, and I don't really want 50% of the Canadian population to hate me. So,
yeah.
What would you? And I guess I'll leave with the last question: is the biggest challenges you kind of see now and in the future? Because from my understanding as the population is aging, and you spoke about this, and I do know this, is the boomers are doing okay for the most part, but the system is going to be sort of hurting as there's less people working, contributing to CPP, funding sort of that liability, paying into OAS, GIS programs. Can it last? Are we? I don't know. I mean, I don't even know. I'm a little bit nervous about it, so I'm just wondering what you see out there, and what can we do to help?
Well, again, I think it's all depending on priority of Canadians. 10 years ago, if I looked at our entire income security system, and I mean everything like welfare, EI, CPP, OAS, veterans, workers' comp, the whole thing, put it all together, that gets us to about 9% of GDP, our gross domestic product. Before the pandemic and the CERB, which ballooned the amount of money we were spending, we were spending close to $200 billion on every sort of income security program. But I watched as seniors took 50% of the pie, and now they're taking 55% of the pie. And it's not going to be long, as you say, when you look at the intergenerational inequities, that we're going to see seniors taking so much of that and getting up towards 60%. And I don't think that's sustainable. I don't think that there's ways to spend less money in that space and encourage people to save more for their retirements at the same time as we concentrate a little bit on the lower income. Perhaps, and again, here's the fourth reason that I won't be running for office. I might increase the clawback on the OAS just a bit to the 3% of Canadians, seniors who have a clawback on their OAS when they have income of over $80,000 a year. I might start that a tiny bit earlier, and that would contribute to a little bit of intergenerational fairness, because those people are doing all right, and maybe they could contribute a bit more. Once again, I know that'd be very unpopular. But.
Well, I know the funny thing about it is it would be unpopular with like 45% of Canadians, even though it only affects 3%.
There you go. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, that's just always the way that it is. It's like, yes, there's only, and it's probably only 3% of mostly when I see it, because it's pretty hard to have an income that high in full retirement. Most of the time it gets clawed back because you're still working.
Yeah.
So it's not, I mean, everybody worries about it a great deal. And I'm like, don't even worry about it. If you're getting it clawed back, you're rich.
Right. And that's how many articles do you see about the GIS clawback that affects 31% of Canadians? And then you see 10 times the amount of discussion on on the OAS clawback that affects 3% of Canadian seniors. So that tells you
Right.
where our priorities are.
Well, I know, but I mean, it comes back to the same problem of saying, there's not really any money in helping, right? And that's the problem. It would almost be like, if and so for example, this podcast grant that we got, this will probably be seen and heard by few thousand people, but it should be in the millions that are finding this information.
Yeah, and then the thing, I guess the important thing I want to say is that the system's incredibly complex, and for those who are at this point in the podcast listening to this, they're probably heads are spinning for most people. So
right.
Yeah.
Well, I know it. I mean, that's why it's good that I talk slow, because it's like, well, we just sort of slowly go through things. And I was talking to a colleague of mine. I said, learn about GIS, and I want you to do a video on this. And maybe that's part of what I should start to look into is, finding a little bit more government funding for people like yourself and myself that say, okay, well, we want to help Canadians understand this. It will help the system. Maybe there's some grant money in the help.
Well, I've tried to get grants for this, and it's only the libraries that have been really forthcoming, and a few nonprofits that have reached out. But when I've tried to get separate funding for this, I've always been turned down for it.
Perfect. Who cares about the low income seniors, right?
Yeah.
See, we've done enough. Well, I won't take up any more of your time. If you want to learn more, that course, the whole tab on openpolicyontario.com sounds terrific. I'm going to check it out, learn a few nuggets that I don't know. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure talking to you, and yeah, keep up the good work. Thanks, John.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome. How do I